What's going on, everybody? Welcome to Fantasy Football Today, presented by BetMGM, the sportsbook born in Vegas. Adam Azer here in studio with Dave Richard. Which camera am I looking at, Dave? This one?
That one.
That one? Yeah. Hey, what's going on? And Jamie's at home. What's up, Jamie?
Hey, boys.
All right, so this is fun. Hey, Dave.
Boys.
Happy
Thanksgiving.
I know. Okay, it's weird that like the fantasy regular season is almost over.
Yeah.
And Thanksgiving is here.
We still got like a couple of weeks left.
I know, it's almost over though. We got weeks 13 and 14.
Let's
and
savor the weeks, I'm saying.
So FFT Open playoffs start next week.
Yeah, I don't want to talk about that.
Yeah, me either. I'd been eliminated.
Me too.
Jamie's still alive in the FFT Open?
I lost the 1 seed. It was very disappointing because now I got to worry about the week 14 mess.
Oh, yep, right.
Are you locked into a playoff spot though?
Yeah, I'm the 2 seed.
But locked in, like you go.
No, there's another week before the playoffs.
If you lose this week, you're still in. Okay.
Oh, okay. All right. Good.
All right. Excellent. Congratulations, Jamie.
Yeah.
All right. So it's this interesting waiver wire week. We do have the injury to J.K. Dobbins, and we sit here every week saying, "Oh, it's a bad week for running backs on the waiver wire," but that's a good thing. Well, now we've got Commanders running backs injured. We've got J.K. Dobbins leaving with a knee injury last night. So, Jamie, let's get right into it. Who are the top 3 waiver wire priorities?
Yeah, Gus Edwards will be number 1. Obviously, if he gets a chance to start, it's a good matchup against Atlanta. We'll see what they do with the number 2 running back there. I hope it's Kamani Vidal and not Hassan Haskins, but somebody's going to have to catch some passes because they have been throwing to their running backs, mostly J.K. Dobbins. But Edwards will be number 1. I guess we should go Jeremy McNichols number 2, just with the opportunity to be the starter for Washington if, in fact, he does get that role with both Brian Robinson Jr. and Austin Eckler banged up. So tough matchup against Tennessee. They've been fantastic against running backs lately. Just looking at what they did to Joe Mixon and Aaron Jones in each of the last 2 games. The best receiver, I mean, look, Keenan Allen. You got to put him in the top 3 too. Just based on what he has done from a target standpoint in the 2 games with Thomas Brown calling plays and coming off a stellar game, plus with a good matchup against Detroit. So I'll say those are the top 3.
All right, Gus Edwards, Jeremy McNichols, and Keenan Allen. Yeah, what do you think, Dave? What are your top 3?
I don't like this week because there are too many question marks and too many what ifs, especially at running back. McNichols would be my number 1 if we knew for sure that Eckler and Brian Robinson were out. Eckler had an ugly looking concussion, so I think he's going to be out. Brian Robinson, we just don't know. We don't have an update, but let's just say if they're both out, and there's certainly a chance they could both be out, McNichols would be my number 1. And I'm not even sure if Gus would be my number 2. He barely played in the second half last night against Baltimore. He had -8 rushing yards in the second half against Baltimore, and it's Baltimore, but it's still like a bad spot. Played 7 snaps. It was just brutal.
Yeah, but he had all the carries, right? So like he didn't play.
They barely ran the ball.
They were trailing by 2 touchdowns.
Yeah.
So I think
they threw the ball 81% of the time in the second half. So if in some crazy world they fall behind against Atlanta, which might happen. They just played on Monday night. Their defense got beat up by Baltimore. Who knows how they're going to play flying across the country to sort of the East Coast in Atlanta, that they could struggle. And then Justin Herbert's got to throw, and they might throw anyway. And Gus Edwards really hasn't been great this season. I understand that he's going to get a good opportunity. No question. He's the goal line guy. But if Amir Abdullah is in the exact same spot that he's in last week, where he played almost 90% of the snaps, I would rather pick up Abdullah before Gus Edwards, especially if it's a full PPR league. So I'm going to rank it that way. McNichols 1, Amir Abdullah 2, Gus Edwards 3, honorable mention Keenan Allen because he absolutely should be picked up as number 4.
Yeah, Abdullah is also interesting because he's 67% rostered, so he's kind of right on the borderline of what we consider for the waiver wire column in the waiver wire episode. But if Abdullah is still available, he had 8 carries for 28 yards. He had 5 catches for 37 yards and a touchdown against Denver. And of course, he gets a team that's the best against running backs in Kansas City this week on the road on Black Friday. And not only is Kansas City great on per carry, 3.16 yards per carry to running backs, 4th fewest receiving yards per game allowed to running backs. That's something Denver struggles with, and he took advantage of it. Kansas City is great against pass-catching running backs, but Abdullah played almost every single snap for the Raiders. Did I say something?
I'm just happy you're here.
Oh,
this
is
rare,
fun, right? Yeah.
This is rare for you to be back in Florida. So back in the day when we did our podcast, there was never any remotes. There was never any live stream didn't exist, anything like that. We were all together in the same room all the time. It was fun. There were hijinks, and like it's rare for it to happen these days because you live in New York. So I'm just happy that you're here. I wish Jamie was here too.
And I don't want any excuses from you today. You're coming to lunch.
We'll see.
I know Dave's a little behind with work today.
I made some bad decisions this morning.
He's coming to lunch. We're going to lunch. I have to buy Jamie lunch. We're going to lunch.
And Heath.
Are you buying me lunch?
Heath? Not Dave. Yes, Dave. Why Heath?
If you're buying me lunch, I'm coming.
I don't want to buy everyone lunch. Maybe I'm not going to lunch. All right. The other thing about this week on the waiver wire is I think it's a good week for the shallow league guys because Cedric Tillman's right now in the concussion protocol. He's got the long time to recover, but Jerry Jeudy is 79% rostered. I don't know how I feel about Jeudy this week. Jamie, how do you feel about him? Because going up against Denver, revenge game, but maybe Surtain covers Jerry Jeudy. And then you've got the Packers situation as well. Maybe Christian Watson's available, but I don't know how I feel about that game. It's going to be like 20 degrees on Thanksgiving. So just a quick glance at the shallow league guys, Jamie, because they're a lot. Oh, Michael Pittman. Michael Pittman's another one with Josh Downs almost certainly out this week. Who's if they're in your dream world where like some of these guys are actually available in your leagues, who's the one to go get?
Jonnu Smith, if everybody's available.
That's okay. A good one.
But are you concerned about just first of all, this whole week could be snowy and super cold. We've got like bad weather coming in this week, beginning Wednesday night. Are you worried about that environment on Thursday, Dolphins at the Packers?
Yeah, I mean that's a bad East Coast game. So, we could see some snow. Some snow there. Yeah, Tua, I like what he said. This is about shattering narratives. I don't think it's going to necessarily happen, but I like the fact that he's, embracing some of the situations that he's had to deal with. But yeah, you can't always just look 1 week. Sometimes it depends on what your record is. You want to look long term. So if I could pick up Jonnu Smith, I'm doing it. If I could pick up Jerry Jeudy, I'm doing it. It's not the greatest, setup for either of those two guys. We're just talking about the ones that are most available or least available, but potentially available. You mentioned Abdullah. Clearly that's a good opportunity to try and get someone who's going to be involved in the passing game, so better in PPR than non. I think Gus Edwards is much better than McNichols personally, just because you have two guys that aren't going to catch the ball at all, and one's getting Atlanta, and one is getting Tennessee. So, I mean, if those are the choices at running back that are available, to me, Edwards is a number 2 running back this week, and McNichols is barely a flex.
Wow.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, if both Robinson and Eckler are out, Jamie, don't you think McNichols is going to see a huge amount of volume? Whereas we've seen all year from the Chargers that they use multiple running backs week in and week out. They're going to pull Kamani Vidal off the inactive list and use him with Gus Edwards.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, the last time we saw the injury to Brian Robinson, I know he's not on the roster right now, but I would imagine he's going to be back on the roster soon. It was Chris Rodriguez playing more than Jerry McNichols, so there's no guarantee it's McNichols getting all the work either.
Okay. And the other factor with this week is that nobody's on a bye. So you might not need these guys, but we actually do have 3 potential starting running back situations with Washington, the Chargers, and the Raiders.
That reminds me of something that everybody should do tonight before they go and start setting their waivers. Set your lineup for week 14.
Yeah.
Just go ahead, go to your lineup page, set it as if it's week 14. Obviously, you can always change your lineup or whatever. But if you go to your lineup and you see that you have all these holes for week 14, this is a pretty good week to start looking at players that you could find off the waiver wire to replace the players who are going to be not there in week 14. Ravens aren't playing in week 14. Commanders aren't playing in week 14. Broncos, Patriots aren't playing. There's 2 more teams. I've got a schedule. I can look and see who they are. But there's 6 teams on bye in week 14. It's going to be a pretty important week in fantasy. You might want to see what holes you have to fill, and you fill them now, because if you wait a week to fill them, I don't know if you're going to be able to have as many plentiful options, especially at running back. Not that there's any guarantee that McNichols, Abdullah, Gus Edwards will still be viable starters in week 14.
Yeah. All right. We got Baltimore,
McNichols
Denver,
won't be. He's on bye.
Baltimore, Denver, Houston, Indianapolis, New England, Washington on a bye in week 14. All right. Let's talk to you about Sunday. Bundle up on Sunday and join us at 11:30 a.m. Eastern at youtube.com/fantasyfootballtoday. And we'll be setting your lineup. You'll helping you set your lineup with a Q&A at 11:30 a.m. Eastern, youtube.com/fantasyfootballtoday. The coverage begins at 10 a.m. on HQ on Sunday morning with Jamie talking fantasy, and there's a lot of football content, just that 3-hour block. I don't really have much of a schedule alert, but just one guy I wanted to point out for future matchups. You're not going to use him this week because he's almost certainly not going to play. That's Jake Ferguson. Luke Schoonmaker gets the Giants this week, who are second against tight ends. I'm not sure I buy it, but they are. But then after that, if Jake Ferguson's back from the concussion, Cincinnati, they're 31st. Carolina, they're 32nd. Tampa Bay, they're 28th. Those are his next three matchups. Jake Ferguson, 53% rostered if you want to plan ahead. And he does not have a bye in week 14. So if you're the Mark Andrews manager, whoever, you can take a look at Ferguson. Now, if you haven't signed up yet for BetMGM, let's do it. Now's the time, and use the bonus code FANTASY. When you sign up, you're going to get up to a $1,500 first bet offer on your first wager with BetMGM. So here's how it works. Download the BetMGM app and sign up using the bonus code FANTASY. Deposit at least $10 and place your first wager on any game, and you're going to receive up to $1,500 in bonus bets if your bet loses. Just make sure you use the bonus code FANTASY when you sign up. News and notes when we come back on Fantasy Football Today.
CBS Sports HQ, giving you college football coverage unlike anyone else.
We're talking Big Ten.
Pre- and post-game coverage.
Are you encouraged with the way that this team responded?
Along with breaking news.
A lot of movement in the rankings this week.
Highlights and expert analysis.
That streak could be in jeopardy here.
Sure. What was your main takeaway from this game? How impressive was his domination?
That really changed the football game.
Let's go ahead and have some more fun.
Another wild ending.
The chaos continues.
Turn to CBS Sports HQ.
Okay, so Dave, just real quick, give me like 30 seconds on your FAAB philosophy right now for week 13.
Use it or lose it. If you need somebody off the waiver wire and you think it's a player that's going to help your team win this coming week, use most of what you have left, unless you don't have that much left, and then use it all. That's basically it. And then if you want to save some of your FAAB for the playoffs, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Then you probably shouldn't target anybody off the waiver wire this week who's going to be popular.
Right. Like if you're going to make the playoffs, what's the point of spending any significant FAAB on guys that are 1 week replacements or 2 week,
I could tell you, like, if you had J.K. Dobbins and you want to go after Gus Edwards just to lock up that duo, and you're 10-2, then it makes sense to go and spend a lot of FAAB to try and lock up Gus Edwards if that's the route you want to go.
10-2. What are you, my driving instructor? 10-2. Thank you, Jamie. Okay, news and notes. So Tommy DeVito will be the starter if he's healthy, and it seems like
I love having you here,
Brian
man.
Dable thinks he's going to be healthy. They're Thursday, and Cooper Rush too. So those two guys, Cooper Rush and DeVito, are both banged up.
What a game!
Yeah, I know. Like I said, I think I made the joke yesterday. People are going to start eating dinner at 4:00 Eastern on Thanksgiving. Gardner Minshew out for the season. Aiden O'Connell, though, it looks like he's likely to play this week. He's eligible to return. Aiden O'Connell will get Cleveland this week, and they've actually been a pretty good matchup. Then they have a bye. Trevor Lawrence is going to practice, has a chance to play. Trevor Lawrence practiced yesterday, has a chance to play coming off the bye against the Texans, and Texans just lost Jalen Petrie, one of their defensive backs. They are a mess. So Lawrence has actually been pretty solid lately, and we'll keep our fingers crossed for Brock Purdy for that Sunday night game at Buffalo. He did some light throwing on Monday. So let's go get in there, Brock Purdy.
We ended up not ranking Brock Purdy. Heath made a pretty interesting point that the line has the 49ers, I think, is 7-point underdogs, 7.5-point underdogs. And with a low team total. So I don't think the odds makers are expecting Brock Purdy at this point. Yeah,
that's fair. But you know what? There are some pretty good quarterback replacement options if you have Purdy. We know about the running back injuries: Brian Robinson, Austin Eckler, J.K. Dobbins, David Montgomery. He's got this shoulder issue.
It sounds like he's going to be okay.
Yeah.
Lions did something really smart. They were winning the game big against Indianapolis. They knew that they were playing on Thursday. They held Montgomery out of the game. Both he and offensive tackle Taylor Decker, it looks like they're both going to be good to go for Thursday's game.
Nice. Amon-Ra St. Brown missed practice. We expect him to play. Khalif Raymond also has an injury. Romeo
that
Dobbs.
One is the Raymond one. No one's starting Raymond.
Yeah.
But that one's a serious one. That might matter for their special teams.
Romeo Dobbs, concussion. So he's probably not going to play on Thursday. Josh Downs, probably not going to play this week.
Right.
Then they have a bye. Hopefully Josh Downs is back in week 15. Yeah. They have a week 14 bye. Cedric Tillman still in the concussion protocol. They're at Denver this week. Brandon Cooks has a chance to play this week I think it seems like he's going to play. But Jake Ferguson not going to play most likely against the Giants on Thursday. And Jatavian Sanders, good news for him. He's out of the hospital. He's doing well.
Awesome.
He was actually having a pretty decent game against the Chiefs, Jatavian Sanders. He had, 30-something yards in the second quarter. And he gets Tampa Bay, and they stink against tight ends if he's back this week. And then let's see, just for IDP purposes, CJ Mosley is optimistic that he'll be back at some point this season. His replacement, who I have on my IDP team, whose name I can never remember.
Sherwood.
Thank you. Has been awesome. So you might get some more weeks with him. And then Roquan Smith's replacement, who you talked about, Malik Harrison. You talked about him on Sunday morning. He was really good. So if Roquan Smith doesn't play, you have another week of
keep an eye on what's happening.
Replacement.
Yeah. Keep an eye on what's happening in Miami. Anthony Walker left with an injury. Minnesota, Ivan Pace left with an injury. Those are two good linebackers. Walker was making a huge difference for that Dolphins run defense over, I want to say, like the last 3 games.
He's almost certainly not going to play this week, but they've avoided long-term injury there.
Tyrell Dotson, who's a name that you brought up, Adam, he was cut by the Seahawks, picked up by the Dolphins. He would be the one replacing Walker in Miami. I don't know if he'll be as good. I only know this because I have both those linebackers on my dynasty IDP team, which I barely won. I started them both. They both had zeros because they got hurt, and I got very lucky to win.
I got one more for you too. With Anzalone's injury in Detroit, Malcolm Rodriguez, he had 8 tackles.
That's a great one.
Nice.
Yes, okay. Awesome.
And then San Francisco, Drake Greenlaw has been designated to return from IR, and Deommodore Lenoir, great cornerback for the 49ers. Getting an MRI on his knee.
Great. He's on my Dynasty League team too.
All right, Jamie, let's get to some waiver wire names. Who are the top 3 priorities at quarterback?
Top 3 priorities at quarterback are, get ready for these names: Derek Carr, Will Levis, and Trevor Lawrence.
Derek Carr. All right. So Carr's been, got the MVS connection lately. He's got the Rams. Levis has Washington, and Lawrence has Houston. Surprised Lawrence isn't number 1. Is it just because we don't know that he's going to play?
Correct. So if you want to play the game of, I could still get Carr, I could still get Lawrence. I could still get Levis. You want to take Lawrence first, then absolutely take Lawrence first with the hope that he's healthy. But, it's a left shoulder injury. So that's the positive thing, that if he does, have any concerns, it's not his throwing shoulder. But I don't think there's a guarantee he's going to play yet. So that's the one thing that's a little bit of a drawback.
Okay, and then you get so many quarterbacks who are in that, it might be available in your league range. Guys like Caleb Williams, Anthony Richardson, Russell Wilson, who's got a great matchup. Cincinnati's an interesting matchup because they're good most weeks, but they're good
great against the run, bad against the pass.
But if you look at how they've done against quarterbacks, it's been 5 quarterbacks who have destroyed them, and it's like Lamar Jackson twice, Lamar Jackson, Jalen Hurts, Jaden Daniels, Jackson twice, and Justin Herbert. Everyone else has struggled, but I will say, they seem like a good matchup. So Russell Wilson, Richardson, Cousins might be available.
Right. Stafford and Cousins.
Caleb Williams.
Super shallow leagues might be there. You mentioned Caleb. He would be a good one.
Did you like Caleb this week, though, against the Lions? They have not given up multiple touchdown passes this year.
That's true. I would just say that he's going to have a lot of volume. I don't think that the Bears are going to be able to run a lot. Just the way that this game's going to go. Their defense really hasn't looked good now for a couple of weeks, and the Lions should be able to put up points. It'll force Caleb Williams to throw a lot more.
I like Caleb Williams better than Russell Wilson this week.
You like him better than Trevor Lawrence, Derek Carr, Will Levis?
No. I would start those guys over Caleb. Just something about Russ feels off right now.
The thing about Caleb, right? I went back because I felt like when we talked about it on Sunday, Anthony Richardson, he just played the Lions. Now Caleb's playing the Lions. I felt like there were these missed opportunities, and I went back and I watched the throws from Anthony Richardson, and I found more than 200 yards of missed opportunities on either bad throws or like very close plays, like Ashton Doolin couldn't get his foot in bounds on that deep ball, and Ogletree dropped the touchdown, 11-yard touchdown. Detroit's defense was not. Right. That play was like kind of miscommunication. There were so many big plays that they almost made. The bad throw to Pierce that could have been a huge play. So I don't know. Like Detroit's been pretty good all year, but they had a lot of wide open guys, which is I think encouraging for Richardson and maybe for Caleb Williams.
Well, I would agree with that, and that kind of jives with the fact that, remember, in the second half he didn't have a very good completion rate at all. Richardson was under 30% completion rate, but his off target rate wasn't crazy. So that kind of plays into it, that maybe just a lot of miscommunications and the duel and play, the drops and all that. Caleb Williams made a bunch of outstanding throws when you go back and watch the film. Some of them were really dangerous. There's like 4 throws where like the Vikings were inches away from an interception. And on all 4 of them, he's completing these awesome darts to his wide receivers. And so if he's going to have volume and he throws like that against the Lions, then he could end up having a pretty good game. If he was out there, I would pick him up ahead of Levis and those other quarterbacks.
And look, it could be one of those pick him up. You don't have to use him this week. Pick him up and see where it happens.
He
with
could
Caleb
be your
Williams.
bye week quarterback in week 14 if you wanted.
Absolutely. So who does Caleb? Well, all right. We'll get it. You tell me who he has in week 14. Let's go to the running backs.
At San Francisco. If Bosa's not playing, that's fine.
Okay. Jamie, the running backs, I'll give it to you again. We've talked about this, but let's repeat it. Who are the top running backs to get?
The top two are easy. It's Edwards and McNichols, just with the opportunity for both to get starting jobs. I like the matchup better for Edwards. Both guys not going to be heavily involved in the passing game based on their profile and what they've done so far this season. So give me Edwards against the Falcons as opposed to McNichols against the Titans. The third running back is a little bit trickier. I think you're looking more handcuff / long-term. So it could be Trey Benson. It could be Roschon Johnson. Right now I have Johnson as the third guy, but it just depends on what you need. Dave mentioned the matchup is not great for him. I think either the rest of the season for the most part. But he has played more under Thomas Brown. Remember, we thought, okay, maybe it was a groin injury was the reason why he played more snaps and Swift played less snaps. Swift was still under 60% snaps for the second week in a row. And Roschon got the touchdown again. So he's touchdown dependent, but just given the nature of what we're looking at from a waiver wire perspective, he may fall in the end zone against Detroit. So that's something that gives him a little bit of an edge over the other guys.
We agree on the names. We disagree on the order just because I'll take McNichols first, but it's only as a 1 week option. If you're looking long term, I would take Gus first. Number one, McNichols isn't going to have that job in Washington forever. Number two, the Commanders are on bye in week 14. We don't know the severity of the Dobbins injury. Dobbins could be back next week. We just don't know. But if he's out for the year, then Gus Edwards is viable as a potential starter for the rest of the season. Roschon is third. I also wanted to make mention of Tank Bigsby, who's 37% available. I got a lot of names on my list that are good to just stash. You're headed toward the playoffs. You've got some spots to play with. Maybe you want to play a little keep away from your opponents. Maybe you just want to fortify your depth. I think Bigsby is still the best running back in Jacksonville. I have no idea if he's going to start playing in week 13 because remember, he got hurt in an ankle injury. But I would try and stash him. Again, kind of a shallow league play because he's only available in less than 40% of CBS Sports leagues. But he's somebody that I would try and pick up. Nice schedule for Jacksonville the rest of the way, too.
By the way, speaking of shallow leagues, if Jalen Warren is available, he's like something like 75%.
28% available.
That's someone you should be looking at for sure. But Jamie, so you go Gus Edwards over McNichols, but Dave said Abdullah at the top of the show. If we throw him in the mix, I think he's 67% rostered. Where would Abdullah rank right now with Edwards and McNichols?
Edwards 1, Abdullah 2, McNichols 3.
Okay. Dave, who are the top wide receivers you want to get this week? Top 3.
Okay. So strictly using the 35% number that we use, Keenan Allen would be number one. He's 39% available. There's a couple of stash players. One of them is Keon Coleman. So kind of in that same vein as Tank Bigsby. When he comes back, maybe he's something good for the Buffalo Bills passing game. Haven't seen Amari Cooper take that big leap yet. It's that outside wide out for them. Maybe it is going to be Keon Coleman. He's 39% available. And then the third name I have is Devon Vele. 96% available. That's one for the guys that are, none of these guys are available in my league. Yeah. We can both do it now. We can do it in unison. That'll be terrible. Vele has been the number 2 route rate guy in that receiving core for Denver for several weeks now. And I kind of think he's got that 12 PPR point floor going week in and week out. So that would be my 3. Keenan Allen 1, Keon Coleman 2, Devon Vele 3.
What about Elijah Moore? Because assuming Tillman's out.
Yeah, it makes sense, especially in PPR. He'd be closer to that list, but he's not going to be in the top 3 for me.
You wouldn't start Moore over Devon Vele this week? If
they're almost the same guy.
You're playing each other.
I know.
Yeah.
I would rather start the receiver playing the Browns than the receiver playing the Broncos.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's like there's a little slot receiver against the Broncos. I don't know. Yeah. I mean, the Broncos are really good. Are they a little beat up in the secondary though? Because they did not, they had 2 receivers go over 80 yards, the Broncos, against the Raiders, Tucker and Myers.
Well, Tucker went over 80 yards because he had a big play.
Yeah.
So I don't know if it's because they're beat up. I'd have to double check that. We did see that Surtain was on Bowers most of the time. So that
no, he was not actually. I watched.
You went back and
Tucker more than anyone.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. But in the red zone, was it Bowers?
I thought like one play where I
thought it was multiple plays we saw.
Yeah, but it was mostly Tucker. Yeah, so Jamie's right. Moss got hurt. I thought they maybe had a safety out too. But
that's right.
All right, tight ends, Jamie. Who are the top 3 tight ends to get?
The top 3 tight ends to get this week would be all the guys that are in shallow leagues. If you can, if you're looking for the guys who are available, it's not It's not pretty. Just let me get there.
Would Disley be on the list?
No, he's rostered too many leagues. Cole Kmet would be 1. Noah Gray would be 2. And Schoonmaker would be 3.
So I know that we have some issues with the roster rates sometimes. He's actually 59% rostered, Will Disley. So would he be number 1?
Disley would be 1. Kmet would be 2. And Noah Gray would be 3.
Will Disley, Cole Kmet, Noah Gray. And honestly, hopefully you have, Disley, didn't have a great game yesterday, but they just didn't have a great game as a passing offense.
But his floor has still been pretty solid. That's now 6 of 7 games with 8 or more PPR points.
So you wouldn't get away from like Hunter Henry for Cole Kmet and Noah Gray, right?
No,
Just
Henry had 9 targets and 5 catches. He's still very involved. He just, Hooper scored a touchdown. I still think he's going to be a go-to guy for Drake May, just based on what we've seen. So the fact that he still had all those opportunities is what you're banking on.
Was anybody like Schoonmaker this week against the Giants?
No.
I don't mind him, but it's with the idea that he's in that same range as Kmet, that 8, 9, 10 PPR point range. And he got there last week because of the touchdown. It wasn't because of volume. I thought he'd have good volume. I kind of like Dowdle this week.
By the way,
I think the Cowboys are going to beat up the Giants, actually.
By the way, the Cole Kmet, the Lions give up the fewest fantasy points to tight ends, so it's really not ideal.
You're looking at, again, opportunities. 10 targets. I know they threw it over 47 times, but it's now 90% snap rate. Most of the season was last week, first game with Thomas Brown. 10 targets in this game. Coming off of that, we'll see. I'd like to see what they look like against a tight end that's featured, because they should have given up a touchdown to a tight end last week.
Oh, Ogletree, yeah. And I don't think they've given up a touchdown all season to a tight end. That would have been the first.
It was AJ Barner.
Right. Who are the top 3 DSTs, Jamie, or top however many?
Cowboys is number 1. Number 2 would be the Chargers. They're 63% roster against Atlanta. Giants would be number 3 against Dallas, 31% roster.
How are we feeling about Arizona? They have a pretty good playoff schedule. Someone emailed me and said, should I pick up Arizona for the playoffs? They're at Minnesota this week. So maybe
you can't use them this week.
But after that, they actually have a pretty good schedule.
I think you can't use them this week. They're still top 12 for me.
Against Minnesota?
You get some turnovers.
On the road, maybe they do. I would be hesitant. They've got Seattle, then New England, then at Carolina, then at the Rams. So there are some matchups that I think Arizona is viable. They'll be a top 12 unit. I would not trust them personally against the Vikings.
Shout out to random emailer for bringing that to my attention. I'm sorry, I don't.
It's Jim from the East Coast.
So is Dallas, the Chargers, and then the Giants? I think you got to be pretty desperate to go with the Giants.
The only positive for the Giants is that they've got a good pass rush, so maybe they get a few sacks.
Not even doing that lately.
But how do you take away what the Cowboys did on offense against Washington? They weren't a total disaster.
Would you go with the Eagles at Baltimore or the Giants on Thursday against the Cowboys?
Giants.
Eagles are pretty beat up right now. They had a bad week in terms of
their
injuries.
pass rush is definitely missing some talent.
And Darius Slay's in the concussion protocol.
In my rankings, as we sit here right now, I've got them back to back.
All right, Jamie, kickers.
Eagles ahead.
Who are our kickers? I can read them if you want.
Are Chase McLaughlin, Will Lutz, John Parker Romo, Brandon McManus, and Blake Grupe.
Okay, there you go. Let's take a quick break and come back and talk about the shallow league players. And we'll be right back on Fantasy Football Today.
Welcome to JJ's.
I'll have a... Wait, there's no way I can get a burger?
No chance. But you can have the NFL on CBS streams live on Paramount+. Oh, hang on. There's a toy.
Just to go back to the Giants defense real quick. That game was 10-9 going into the fourth quarter before everything got crazy between Washington and Dallas. So it's not like Dallas was having this offensive game.
And how many touchdowns were defensive touchdowns? Weren't there 2 DST touchdowns? Right. So it's not. You're right. It's not like the offense was totally on fire. Okay.
And Washington only sacked Cooper Rush once, but there were 2 fumbles in the game from the Cowboys, and Rush had no turnovers or no interceptions. But I think it's given the offensive line situation for Dallas, the Giants DST is going to be decent this week.
Okay. So
I don't hate it.
Yeah, the fans will enjoy that. I really need to work on the shallow league voice. I just don't have anything. Like, why would the sophisticated, stuffy guy be playing in shallow leagues? If anything, he'd be playing in 18-team leagues that start 3 quarterbacks, Dave. So I have nothing. But Jamie, who are the shallow league guys that we should be looking at?
I'll start a quarterback. You mentioned Caleb Williams. I think he's worth rostering, not to necessarily play this week, but to have on your team just moving forward. Love Anthony Richardson this week, taking on the Patriots. Kirk Cousins, not for this week, but his next 2 games are favorable. So he's at 82% rostered. I don't want to play him this week at all, taking on the Chargers. Russell Wilson, if you need somebody for this week, you can use him against the Bengals and gets Cleveland again next week. So had 15 fantasy points against them in the snow. Maybe he wasn't as bad as, I'm not giving him credit for, but better weather. Hopefully he performs a little bit better. Running backs, Amir Abdullah, we talked about already. He's at 66% rostered. Jalen Warren, 72% rostered. Those would be the 2 guys to go get. I think make the most sense. Wide receiver, we touched on a couple of guys with Jerry Jeudy in terms of what he's at. Christian Watson, I would go right back to him. I don't care that he had the drop and no catches on 3 targets. If he catches that, we're all still excited about what Christian Watson's capable of doing. Romo Dunze's got 10 targets in each of his last 2 games. Michael Pittman, clearly no downs and 15 targets in the 2 games with Anthony Richardson back. Tight ends, there's a lot of guys. So we have let me get there. Sorry. We have Jonnu Smith is the prize this week. Evan Ingram, I think, certainly benefits if Trevor Lawrence is back. Hunter Henry, again, 9 targets, still getting a lot of opportunities. Tucker Kraft now has 6 touchdowns in his last 8 games. Might benefit with Romeo Doubs out. And Dalton Kincaid, at this point, I think you almost say deeper leagues as opposed to shallow leagues, but 73% rostered if he was dropped. Hopefully he comes back and hopefully starts to play like the guy we were thinking of earlier this season.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. You said that Jonnu Smith would be the shallow league prize. I wonder though if Jonnu Smith, well, obviously maybe it depends on what you need, but to me, Jalen Warren, man, I would not even hesitate to be my first waiver wire priority. The guy's got he's got like a pretty nice floor part, of 8 points, which isn't that bad, but he pretty much scores that every week. Yeah, and then we've been saying this for 3 years, so I don't think it's ever going to happen, but he just this could be the week where he overtakes Najee Harris. I don't think that's going to happen, but he just seems like he's got more juice than Najee Harris always. So anyway, Jalen Warren, 72% roster. It's just hard to find running backs that could be flex worthy. Okay. But Jonnu Smith's been great. I think that as we speak in the shallow league context, and even in the non-shallow leagues, right, is like, what is the Green Bay offense going to look like, Dave? Because do you trust Christian Watson if he's available on your waiver wire without Romeo Doubs almost certainly this week, right? Do you go with Dontavian Wicks, who got a lot of targets when Watson was out earlier?
Right.
And
they
Love,
kind of been playing the same role, just not at the same time.
I think Love has thrown 40 passes in his last 2 games combined, so we just haven't seen a lot of volume. If the Dolphins go in there and put up some points, that'd be great. But the weather is going to be not really conducive to that. So what do you think about any Kraft, Watson, Wicks, maybe even Bo Melton, whoever you see on the waiver wire for this team?
Well, when I think about Romeo Doubs and his role, one of the things that he's good at are those short and intermediate targets. So he's not getting those 50-yard rainbows from Jordan Love like Christian Watson would get or Dontavian Wicks would get. On occasion he does, but for the most part, he's anywhere 15 air yards or closer to the line of scrimmage. I would think that Tucker Kraft would pick up more of that with Romeo Doubs up, and I think that Jaden Reed would pick up a lot more targets with Romeo Doubs out. I'd have to go back and look at who else might be someone who comes off the bench and is a benefactor from that. And maybe there's someone that you saw, Bo Melton, Malik Heath, one of those guys. Maybe it was Wicks for all I know. I haven't had the chance to go back and study that yet, but I will. I think that that's probably where they go with short area throws, especially if the Dolphins are going to play a lot of zone coverage to try and take away that deep ball from Jordan Love.
The thing is, the Dolphins, we can scoff because they haven't had a very hard schedule, but we're 12 weeks into the season. They're 3rd best against wide receivers. Mm-hmm. That's another thing to keep in mind.
And I think what you look at is you look at what he did against what they did against Stafford, which was impressive in that Monday night game. Yeah. Then I think you got to give him a little bit of credit for what they did against Drake May, because May had been playing a lot better than what he showed last week as well. So their pass rush with Chop Robinson has certainly been impressive. He's making a late season push to challenge Jared Verse for Defensive Rookie of the Year. And that's been huge, and their secondary for the most part has played well and been consistent. So it's not a bad spot to be in. And to the article that you sent us, Adam, what they're doing is they're keeping their defense relatively fresh. So maybe that's a big part of what's happened this season as well, is that they're not putting them in all these big play 3-and-outs if they don't get big plays scenarios. So the dink and dunk offense is probably keeping them a little fresher.
I do think that they have had a very easy schedule, and this could be the best passing offense that they've seen all year, unless I'm forgetting someone. So we'll see.
Well, I mean, they had the Rams when those guys were healthy in Los Angeles.
Yeah, that was a really, really good performance. But Nakua and Kupp, I think, both had good games. I think they both had good games. I mean, Nakua scored at least 18 points. Kupp had a touchdown, as I recall.
Well, we're talking about the quarterback as opposed to the receivers.
Yeah. Well, you know what? I look forward to tomorrow's show. We'll be breaking down the Thanksgiving game and the 3 games, and also the Chiefs Raiders on Friday. All right, Dave, I don't know why we talked about those guys, because none of those guys are available in my league. So who are the deep league guys?
Let's start at quarterback. Will Levis, 78% available. If you need a quarterback, bye week replacement over the next 2 weeks, I think Will Levis is somebody who would qualify. Jameis Winston is also out there. At least we know that Winston, he didn't have a lot of volume last Thursday. I wonder if he'll end up having more volume this coming week with the Browns obviously throwing. And then there's one less target with Tillman for this week. We talked about McNichols, 86% available. He's going to be an easy guy to go and target if Gus Edwards is already rostered, if Amir Abdullah is already rostered. Other running backs that are highly available, it ain't pretty. It's like Sean Tucker, it's Zamir White, it's Jaleel McLaughlin, guys that you're pretty much stashing. If you're starting them, you're hoping for like 3 or 4 fantasy points. Wide receiver, Devon Vele, but he's going to be on bye in week 14, so keep that in mind. If you need him for this week, that's a different story. Elijah Moore, 69% available. If you need somebody deeper than that, Thielen, Marquez Valdez Scantling, both of those guys, 75% available, and players that are, in the case of Thielen, a little bit safer, might be able to get you 10 PPR points, maybe 15 if he scores a touchdown. MVS is a boom bust play, might get you 4 PPR points, might get you 15 PPR points. It depends on what you need. Tight end, I would say that the top name is Noah Gray, 93% available.
Yeah.
Watch the snaps. He only played 10 snaps with DeAndre Hopkins last week. And so when I watch Noah Gray play, again, it's almost like what I said with Will Dissly. He doesn't do a lot of things that are particularly special. He's good at finding open space against zone coverage. And obviously he's a target in the red zone.
Yeah.
He leads the Chiefs in red zone and end zone targets over their last 2 games. And he's had a 50% route run rate since their bye. So that tells me that there's something going on where they're using Noah Gray a little bit more, kind of like a part-time slot receiver replacement. He's running a lot of those inside routes. So maybe there's something to it. I worry about what his stats would be if he doesn't score a touchdown. It could be 6 PPR points. So I wouldn't be excited about that. If Luke Schoonmaker, if Ferguson's out on Thursday, I'd rather start Schoonmaker than Noah Gray, and he's available in 88% of leagues. And that's really about it. If you go to the DSTs, Cowboys are 77% available. They were Jamie's favorite. They're my favorite as well. I think they're like a top 8 DST going up against the G-men, especially. And I told you, you already knew that the Giants offensive line was terrible. They were absolutely awful last week.
Yeah, they were.
And I can't help but think, even if Parsons doesn't play, that the Cowboys are going to be able to get pressure on DeVito, force some turnovers, get some sacks, and finish as a top 8 DST.
Cowboys are my number 1 DST this week.
Number 1. Wow.
So we'll get into. I want to talk about Monday Night Football, but I need to be reminded. So I owe you lunch. What was the bet exactly? It was Quentin Johnston versus Xavier Liggett.
Me and Heath with Quentin Johnston versus Xavier Liggett.
For how long? What time period?
It was the 3 weeks of before you came down.
And Quentin Johnston, because I'm just thinking about this now, he scored 0 points yesterday. Am I not winning this bet now?
No, you lost
it. It's points per game, right? So that's 16.6 divided by 2 for Xavier Liggett. That's 8.8, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes. 16.6 divided by 2 is 8.3.
8.3. And for Johnston, it's 23.2 divided by 3. I won the bet. It was you owe me lunch. It was, according to you, Tennessee, Cincinnati, and Baltimore. It was the last 3 weeks, weeks 10, 11, 12.
But it's 3 games of one player and 2 games of another.
Yeah, so it's points per game. So Xavier Liggett has been better.
You said total
points. He had a bye.
That was your fault.
No.
There was something. We won the bet last week.
I think we won the bet because we assumed that you thought. I think you thought you won the bet because you just assumed Quentin Johnson was going to be.
We go back and watch the tape and see when it was.
Yeah,
all
right. We got to watch the tape. We got to watch the tape.
Coming off of the game against the Browns for Johnston, and
right.
And you said you would take Leggett. I don't remember what the length of time was though. I thought it was over because we had to factor in his bye week.
If it was points per game from then to now, Leggett wins. If it was just week 10, which may have been, then Quentin Johnston wins 10.4 to 7.2 fantasy points. All right, we got to check the tape.
Look at this jousting between you two.
Yeah, because we might go into a steakhouse.
Who doesn't pay?
All right, Baltimore 30 and the Chargers 23. JB, what were your Quentin Johnson actually like with a total dud? That's kind of a big takeaway. But what were your big takeaways from this game?
It's one
Jamie?
of the worst games you could possibly have. He had 5 targets, 3 drops, and no catches. So it was pretty dismal for him. Abysmal for him. I thought Herbert was on his way to a monster game and then clearly did not get it going, so that was frustrating to watch after he had the rushing touchdown on their opening drive. Dobbins' injury sucked, because he looked like he was going to have a big game as well. And then, it kind of just took off from the Ravens there. And you kind of wonder if Johnson has the first drop, the one that everybody's going to remember, that it felt like maybe they have a chance to get back into the game, and we have a little bit more action from Baltimore side. But Derrick Henry ran well, 140 yards rushing, no touchdown, so his touchdown streak stopped. Lamar Jackson's throw to Rashad Bateman was amazing. The catch was even better. It's a little frustrating right now with Zay Flowers because he's getting some opportunities, not a lot, and he's not producing the last couple of weeks. So you're going to continue to start him. This is a tough matchup against Philadelphia, and with no teams on a bye, he's just outside my top 24 for this week.
Okay. Yeah. The thing that he's playing a lot, Zay Flowers, he had an end zone target. I don't know if it officially counted as an end zone target, but there was a defender right in the way. No. The one where Jackson was rolling to his left and he threw. Flowers was the intended receiver, and it was just batted down by a defender who was about a yard into the end zone. I don't know if you remember that play, but Flowers was open. I mean, he was open. If the defender had been like invisible, then he could have if something go right through him. It would have been a touchdown. I guess if I would be looking at him as a buy low right now, because I think there are probably people like, oh, since the Deontay Johnson trade, he's been terrible. Deontay Johnson doesn't play. So
played 5 snaps.
It's just like Zay Flowers is playing a ton.
There's no more trade deadline. There's no more trades.
I mean, I think like you're right up against it. Some people go to Thanksgiving week.
I've had people ask me, when's the trade chart coming out? This is my last chance to make a trade. There are some leagues.
Would you agree though that Zay Flowers looks like a
if you
buy
could,
low?
Sure, absolutely.
Like something's down to happen. Like he's just ready to make a big play.
And he had 8 targets in the game. I understand that he's very much a boom or bust type of fantasy wide receiver. But when the boom's hit, you're going to be happy that you've got him in your lineup.
Do you guys feel more confident right now in Ladd McConkey, who had 6 catches for 83 yards on 6 targets, or Zay Flowers?
I think McConkey's the number one guy. And if it's full PPR, I think he's safer and I think he's steadier. So I would take McConkey over Zay Flowers.
And Mark Andrews, has Mark Andrews had a single game? Okay, 5 targets. He really just needs 4 targets. 4 or 5 targets, and he gets you at least 9.1 fantasy points every single time.
How many of those were with touchdowns?
1, 2, 3, 4. Well, yeah, most.
So he's a touchdown or bust fantasy tight end.
But 2 games where he had 5 targets, he had 50 yards, 4 catches for 51, 4 catches for 55. It's not that bad. It's all he needs is 4 or 5 targets.
Well, sure. So when he gets those catches and he doesn't score, it's 9 PPR points. You can still feel like that you could find somebody with a little bit more upside off your way. Like Jonnu Smith obviously has way more upside than that.
But you're not going with Komet, or would you go with Disley?
They're almost the same type of player. Komet versus Andrews.
Komet's had like 3 good games this year. Would you go with
the difference
Disley?
Is that Komet isn't scoring touchdowns. I think if the Chargers don't have J.K. Dobbins, their run game could be in trouble, and Disley could end up seeing more targets. So I think I would consider Disley over Andrews.
Andrews is tight end 14 per game in full PPR. I'm sure he's better than that in the other formats. All right, back to the waiver wire. We could do a little bit of drop-o-meter. I didn't have anyone necessarily prepared, but let's just go like wide receivers get dropped all the time. So would you drop Wan'Dale Robinson, 55% rostered? Drop-o-meter on him?
It's high. It's like an 8, 9.
How about Xavier Leggett? Is he more of an add or more of a drop? He's 53% rostered.
It's hard to say there's any reason to trust the Panthers receivers, but they're all viable options if you need someone because they're all getting different opportunities to make plays. But I would rather hold Leggett than drop him.
I don't mind dropping him. I don't know when we'll feel good about starting him, knowing that Thielen's back and then eventually Sanders will come back, and they seem to be spreading the ball around a little bit.
Deontay Johnson is super droppable, 50% rostered.
Right into the dumpster.
It's hard to think of a player whose value sunk more than his after a midseason trade. My goodness, this is so bad for him. He was like a must start.
You can't find anybody like that other than Devontae Adams and Amari Cooper.
Are you kidding? I mean,
this guy's so worse than that. This
Yeah.
is worse than that, but it's funny how all the receivers that got traded really didn't amount to much.
Ricky Pearsall, 43% rostered.
Oh, he might be hurt on top of being like fourth in targets for the Niners.
Okay.
He had the one good game, the one big play against Tampa Bay. That was my concern coming off of that, and he's done nothing since. 2 targets and no catches.
Yeah, I was hoping that he'd be more involved, and he wasn't.
And Tyler Lockett, 68% roster. I think it's probably time.
The way that JSN's been playing, and you know what the upside is with DK, and those two guys seem to be hogging targets. They're funneled to them more so than Lockett. You know, when you start Lockett, you're hoping he has one of those lightning in a bottle weeks. There's probably 5 or 6 receivers that we can point to that might be on the waiver wire that are in the exact same type of canoe, but maybe a little bit better and have a little bit of a higher floor than Lockett.
Jamie, would you drop Audric Estime or Javonte Williams at this point?
Javonte, I would hold depending on what you need. So like if you need a running back for this week, I'd rather start Edwards. I'd rather start McNichols. So if that's the decision you have to make, but Estime is definitely droppable.
Okay. And let's go take another look at the waiver wires. There are a lot of other names to talk about. I actually wanted to ask you about Aaron Rodgers. We haven't spoken about him. He's actually not been that bad. He usually gets you around 20 points. So quarterbacks, we've got Brock Purdy and Trevor Lawrence questionable for this week. We got Gardner Minshew out. Jamie mentioned Cousins. He's 84% rostered, so not super available. We don't love him this week. Schedule gets a little bit better. Anthony Richardson, 78% rostered. 4 of the last 5 quarterbacks to face the Patriots have scored 20 or more fantasy points. They've allowed 8 passing touchdowns in their last 2 games to Stafford and Tua. Wilson, Caleb Williams. You don't have to start these guys, but maybe pick them up. So then the waiver wire guys who are rostered in fewer than 65% of leagues, or 65 or fewer percent, less percent, whatever it is. Derek Carr against the Rams, Will Levis at Washington, and Trevor Lawrence, who would be number 1 for Jamie if we knew that he were.
I moved him to first.
Okay. And Houston's been struggling. They're super banged up, at least in the second.
The only thing they've got going for them is their pass rush is really strong. And we know the offensive line for Jacksonville isn't very strong. So is this going to be a game where Trevor Lawrence is going to have to get the ball out fast, a lot of short throws, hope that his receivers make plays after the catch? I agree. I think he's the one you should go after first. It's either him or Will Levis. And it's just a matter of how much you want to trust Will Levis. I don't think a lot of other people are going to target Will Levis in 1 QB leagues right now. So if you go and get Trevor Lawrence and Lawrence doesn't play, you should be able to find Will Levis on the waiver wire a couple days later.
They got nobody on bye this week, so we have pretty high standards. Can we get 21 or more fantasy points in 6-point per passing touchdown leagues from Cooper Rush against the Giants, Bryce Young against Tampa Bay, Aiden O'Connell at Kansas City?
No,
less than 21.
I'd go under 21. I mean, I would debate that with Trevor Lawrence and Will Levis. I don't know how close they'll get to 21.
Bryce Young just had his best game of the season. It was 18.5 points.
But he's got Tampa Bay this week, so it's probably his best matchup, right? And he's got him twice.
They might be able to run in this game, though.
Levis, like Washington hasn't been that bad. Well, 21 or more fantasy points to quarterback in 3 of their last 4 games, but he also has Jacksonville twice in his upcoming schedule.
His upcoming schedule is fantastic.
Yes.
Levis, yeah.
Agreed. So I almost think we need to kind of reframe the quarterbacks for those fantasy managers that have Lamar Jackson, that have, maybe they're starting Richardson, the quarterbacks that are Bo Nix, the quarterbacks that are on bye in week 14. And Levis against Jacksonville sounds really good to me. That sounds a little bit better to me. I don't know. We could talk about Trevor Lawrence versus Will Levis in week 14.
No, I'm thinking Levis. Well, here's the thing about Levis. He's a big play guy, right? Like it's just he's airing it out. The only guy who's doing it more than him is Russell Wilson lately. And Jacksonville gives up the most big plays in the NFL.
Right. But they can also run on Jacksonville. And so Tony Pollard's going to have a big game. So how much throwing will Will Levis do? versus Trevor
Tony
Lawrence.
Pollard has a big game all the time.
Trevor Lawrence is going to do a lot of throwing against Tennessee, and that's the way you compete with Tennessee is you throw on them.
All right, but Levis could have a nice finish here. And then, all right, how do you feel about Aaron Rodgers against the Seahawks?
I don't like him. Seattle's defense the last 2 weeks has actually been really good. They held Brock Purdy to 1 touchdown. He had a rushing touchdown in that game. They shut down Kyler Murray. They're getting healthier on that side of the ball. You got all this drama going on with the Jets right now. So I'd like to see him play well, but then he gets Miami the following week. And if we're going to buy into the Dolphins defense, it's 2 potentially bad matchups in a row. So yes, he's played better, 20 or more fantasy points in 3 of his last 4 games. But I just don't know if you want to trust it. He's not getting you a lot of yards. So it's touchdown dependent at this point. I mean, his last game, he was 184 passing yards and 2 touchdowns. So it's not like Aaron Rodgers is doing has great performances overall. Everything just feels off about that team.
Yeah. All right. How do you feel about, real quick, Drake May against the Colts or Jameis Winston at Denver?
Another team in terms of the Colts that have been very good against opposing quarterbacks. They did a great job against CJ Stroud. Granted, that was, Stroud without Nico Collins. They did a great job against Josh Allen. They did a great job against Jared Goff.
Rodgers. And Rodgers, too. Pretty good against Rodgers.
Goff was good.
Rodgers got 20 fantasy points against them. So just given the fact of how Drake May is performing right now, I know both teams are going into their bye, so they can, clearly be looking ahead. The Colts need this game. Patriots clearly are a draft, focused team at this point. The Colts are still in the playoff hunt. So I would trust their defense more than I would trust Drake May.
All right, and Jameis Winston, we would trust him, but it's Denver, and only Lamar Jackson is.
You got a pretty good sample size of what Jameis Winston is. He's played 4 games now. He's had 2 good matchups, 2 bad matchups. He's been great in the 2 good matchups. He's been terrible in the 2 bad matchups. This is a bad matchup.
Yeah, I guess if you wanted to make the case, you got to think about the weather and the bad matchup against Pittsburgh. Hard to throw, and I played pretty well down the stretch
and low volume too,
and had 2 rushing touchdowns. But Denver's is pretty much as tough as it gets. Running backs, if Jalen Warren's available, grab him. Amir Abdullah is another guy, 67% roster, 66, whatever it is. And then there's Gus Edwards and Jeremy McNichols. We've talked about those guys. If you can't get them, Roshan Johnson, get some handcuffs. Tajay Spears, if Tajay Spears is back, he's a guy who could get you 8 points or more if you're desperate. And Justice Hill got lucky. I started him in a league yesterday. That was, thank you.
Bye-week replacement.
Yeah. I wish. Horrible running back replacement.
Okay.
But we got Pacheco in that league. Jerome Ford, Devin Singletary. I mean, look,
yeah,
with all these fumbles for Tyrone Tracy, you wonder what the role will be for Devin Singletary. He's 49% rostered. Cowboys are 29th against running backs. They allow 4.5 yards per carry. The Saints are next for the Giants. They allow 5 yards per carry to running backs. I don't know. Is any appeal there to Singletary?
I would rather have Singletary than Justice Hill, just because I think we're going to see a split between Singletary and Tyrone Tracy at this point. I don't think they're going to completely get away from Tracy, but Singletary might lead them in carries, and he might be the guy they trust near the goal line, and that's going to be the most important part of all.
So I think in terms of if you need someone to play this week, you'd rather have Singletary. I would 1,000% much rather roster Justice Hill than Devin Singletary on the off chance that something happens to Derrick Henry.
Okay, that's fair.
And then go back to Jerome Ford real quick, playing the Broncos, 2 games ago, he had 4 catches. If they use him in the passing game, as we've seen, it's now 9 running backs this season after what Abdullah did. 9 running backs have scored at least 6.8 PPR points or more with just their receiving totals alone.
Against the Broncos. Okay. You could maybe think about Sincere McCormick if you're super desperate. Yeah. And Jaleel McLaughlin, it was his week. And then he got
the rotation's up, and it's Estime's week again.
Yeah, it's back to Estime. Do they have another running back? Going to elevate for the practice squad?
They're going to.
All right, wide receivers.
Don't forget about Tank Bigsby as a stash.
Yeah, Tank Bigsby.
Yeah, that's a good call there. I put Bigsby in the call.
There's a couple other stashes at wide receiver. I'll bring them up as we go.
Well, I just want to know how you guys feel about Jerry Jeudy this week. 79% rostered. He's playing really well, right? Let's see, 12.9 or more points in 4 straight games.
Yeah.
But now it's Denver. What do we think?
I think you buy into what the track record has been and what the volume has been. He'll be extra motivated taking on his former team. This is still going to be an offense that throws a lot. He gets plenty of throws inside of that 15 air yard range, and he can make plays after the catch. He did that in the snow against Pittsburgh. So I feel okay about Jerry Jeudy this week.
It's got to be number 2 receiver. I'd rather start Ladd McConkey, for example.
I would too, yeah.
Jeudy only has 1 touchdown in the 4 games with Jameis. So it's not like he's getting you a lot of production easily. He had the huge game 2 games ago, But yes, he should benefit without Tillman there. And maybe if Riley Moss is not there, he might benefit. But this is not going to be a great game for Jerry Jeudy.
But it could be 10 targets, 7 catches, 70 yards.
I think he's got one game with more than 8 targets, if I'm not mistaken.
No.
He's got
no. I mean, unless I'm wrong.
6 targets right against
Yeah, he had 6 against Pittsburgh, but I think he had 8, 11, and 11 in the previous 3 games.
So 2 with 11, I'm sorry.
And it's still a high target share each week and certainly a high target per route runner.
Yeah, no, he should be added for sure.
Number 1 target getter for the Browns now.
All right, Michael Pittman. Would you rather start Michael Pittman this week against the Patriots or Jerry Jeudy?
Jeudy. It's close, especially with Downs out, Doolin out. Like, they're running out of bodies, and Pittman's going to be back in the saddle to lead that team in targets.
Oh, nice Aerosmith reference. Romo Dunze is 71% rostered. I went back, I looked at his targets. It wasn't really the most impressive game for Odunze, but there were 2 throws on the same possession where he could have had either like a 20-yard gain or maybe even a touchdown up the sideline, and Caleb didn't really put it on him. Christian Watson. If Christian Watson and Rome Odunze, Jamie, are both out there on your waiver wire, who are you prioritizing?
Watson.
Ooh. What? I would say Odunze. I think he'll get more targets.
Keenan Allen is your favorite.
If he's out there,
if he's 61%.
Right.
Elijah Moore, Devon Vele, Demario Douglas. I mean, this is a super safe play. Around 10 PPR fantasy points for Douglas.
Mm-hmm. You don't have him in week 14. Same thing with Vele. But rest of season, good bench wide receivers, especially in full PPR. Not so much in non-PPR.
Noah Brown could have 4 targets. He could have 8. You never know with Noah Brown, but he's always got a chance to do something. He had a nice game against Dallas.
Wouldn't it come down to how much the Commanders are going to throw in a certain game? And this week, if they don't have Robinson, they don't have Eckler, they might throw a lot. So that would benefit Noah Brown.
Oh, so you were talking. Okay, the MVS is on this list too. But you were talking about someone. Oh, Noah Gray leading the Chiefs in green zone targets, end zone targets, whatever in the last 2 weeks. Do you know who leads the Tennessee Titans in green zone targets this year?
This year,
yeah. And he only has 5 to lead the team, and he's the only one with more than 2. And he's on the waiver wire. It's Nick Westbrook-Ikhine.
It's him?
Nick Westbrook-Ikhine. You might think, all he does is score touchdowns from distance, right? He has 6 touchdowns this year, Nick Westbrook-Ikhine.
Are they all in the last 6 weeks?
Or last 7 weeks, maybe? Yeah. 4 of them are from inside the 10-yard line. And 2 of them are long touchdowns, including a 98-yarder. But Nick Westbrook-Ikhine is the only Titans player with more than 2 green zone targets. He leads the team. Calvin Ridley has 1 green zone target this year. That's inside the 10-yard line.
All this Westbrook-Ikhine.
Yeah.
By the way, Noah Brown's last 4 games, 27 targets. Terry McLaurin's last 4 games, 17 targets. Why does that make sense?
It does not.
Could it make sense from the idea that teams are doubling McLaurin, and so more targets are going to Noah Brown? And that could be happening. That might be what's happening in Tennessee. I don't know. I'd have to go back and watch and see. But if teams are doubling Calvin Ridley, it would make sense that Will Levis is going to go to another player.
Now, find a way to get McLaurin involved,
yeah, sure. Well, that's a Cliff Kingsbury problem.
Jamie, what do you think about the other Colts receivers, Pierce and Mitchell, against the Patriots?
Yeah, they both benefit. Christian Gonzalez basically shadowed Tyreek Hill in this game last week, so that opened things up for Waddle and Jonnu Smith. I wonder what he'll do or where he'll go against the Colts if they send him anywhere. You probably assume it would be against Pittman. So Pierce is a big play threat. We've seen that, and the last time Pittman was out, Pierce had a big game. That was with Joe Flacco. I think if you're looking at Adonai Mitchell, he has the probably best opportunity to step into Josh Downs' role. So will he? We'll see. I don't want to trust any of them with no teams on a bye. I certainly would like to roster still Pierce first and then Mitchell, just in case this is as they indicated, a potential multi-week injury for Josh Downs. But nobody's starting those guys with no teams on a bye in week 13.
Sure. And then there's 2 stash wide receivers. I mentioned one earlier with Keon Coleman. This is for the teams that are headed to the playoffs. You just want to fortify the bench. Shallow leagues. Chris Olave is still out there in 31% of leagues.
Wow.
I don't know when he's coming back. Remember, he suffered that nasty concussion. He's had a couple of them this year now. But if he comes back out of the bye, Saints are practicing and he's doing well, that's somebody I would absolutely love to grab off the waiver wire. You can double check to see if he's there.
New Orleans is 2 games out of the first place. If they win another game, things get kind of interesting. So then you've got the Carolina receivers.
Winning that division.
Who's your?
I think so too. I think the Bucs are winning that division too. But if they somehow botch it along the way and the Saints do keep on winning like you're talking about, Yeah, they could absolutely steal it away.
So just real quick, Dave, who's your favorite Panthers wide receiver if you had to pick one?
It's Liggett, but it's not by a huge margin.
It's such a good matchup other than the Giants. Everyone seems to do well against Tampa
you'd
Bay.
think that Liggett would be able to come through and lead that team in targets last week, and it ended up being David Moore.
And
which
we
was
don't
kind of crazy.
We have Ray McLeod listed on here. It was last we saw Darnell Mooney had an injury.
I think he's going to be okay.
And Parker Washington, his last 2 games with Trevor Lawrence, he went over 40 yards in both of them. He scored 7 to 7.6 PPR fantasy points. So obviously we're looking at low standard here, but Parker Washington, 4% roster. Tight ends, Jonnu Smith.
Davis is out, so that's part of it too.
True, yeah. Jonnu Smith has been the man. Green Bay is a good matchup, and Jonnu Smith's been really good. Evan Ingram. So you would rather have Jonnu than Evan Ingram?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Hunter Henry, Tucker Kraft. Like, would you pivot from Tucker Kraft, who scores a lot but doesn't get targets, to Will Dissly?
If Dobbs is out, I'd rather have Kraft.
By the way, actually, let me put this to you. If Taysom Hill and Jonnu Smith are both available, who are you going with?
Jonnu, but Taysom would be second.
He would be.
All right, so our top priorities would be Will Dissly, Cole Kmet, Noah Gray, Luke Schoonmaker. For a 1-week scenario, I don't know what that 1-week scenario would be, like why this would be the week when no one's on bye, but who are you ranking higher this week? Schoonmaker against the Giants or Kmet against the Lions at the Lions?
They both have absolutely terrible matchups. So I'll take the guy that's getting a few more targets with the better quarterback. So I'll take Kmet.
Schoonmaker. I love it. Pat Freiermuth has a great matchup. Cincinnati is so bad against tight ends. And then Cleveland next week. Didn't he do something against the Bengals, though? I think he actually had a good game against the Bengals.
This is their first meeting, right?
Is it?
Yeah.
You'd have to weigh him.
Pittsburgh's first division games were the last 2 weeks.
Oh, yeah, you're right. So
maybe it was last year. You're thinking of who the
sorry.
He had a decent game against the Browns last week with 449.
Yeah. It was Cleveland. That's his week 14 matchup. He had 4 catches, 59 yards.
Okay, but if you're considering Freiermuth, you're weighing him against the Schoonmakers and Noah Grays of the world, and you might just rather take your chances with the devil you don't know than the devil you do know.
What do you think Spoon Man is about? The song.
I don't know.
I'm going to find out. No, I'm going to find out. I have a source. I'm going to find out. And Juwan Johnson.
They'll tell us in the YouTube.
You can take a look at Dawson Knox. Oh, that's right. I don't have the YouTube comments in front of me. I'm sorry, everybody. Dawson Knox if Kincaid's out again. Dallas DST. Jamie loves him. Chargers against the Falcons. Giants at Dallas. Seahawks at the Jets. Cardinals at Minnesota. Not a bad week to stream DSTs. And the kickers are Chase McLaughlin, Will Lutz, John Parker Romo, Brandon McManus, and Blake Rupe. Thank you so much for watching and listening, everybody. We will talk to you tomorrow. We're going to look at the Thanksgiving games, the Black Friday game. We're going to preview we'll preview 4 games and figure out some other fun stuff to do on the Wednesday show. We'll see you then.